Welcome back, everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about none other than randomly the Samsung Galaxy Note 2 and see, I guess, how this thing holds up in 2021. Now, obviously what I'm going to tell you is that I really don't think anybody should be using this device in this day and age, but more interestingly than that, it's so interesting to see basically how a device that came out in 2012 has so many more features and just crazy built-in hardware things that in this day and age we don't have and will probably never get back on any of our devices. Now, whenever I think of a device like the Samsung Galaxy Note 2, I just get so nostalgic. This is like where my love of phones kind of was at its peak, in my opinion. Probably like 2016, 2017, it was out there too. But at this point, I was only using, I think, like some random HTC. I think it was the HTC First or the Samsung Galaxy Exhibit 2. And those were good phones at the time. I think they weren't like amazing, but they were good enough for me. And the Note 2 was the cream of the crop. It was one of those devices that I thought of myself at the time that if you get this phone, you will never have to get another phone ever again. It has everything you need in a phone that I just never think, how much better of a phone could Samsung do at the time? And if you remember, this was around the time that a lot of people call these bigger Samsung or bigger tablet phones phablets, and it was the corniest thing ever. I will never understand it. Like even me saying it out loud, I just cringe up, but it's a part of our history and we just have to move on from it. But the Samsung Galaxy Note 2 is a solid phone. Obviously, I'm not going to link one down in the description, but I'll probably link some Samsung Galaxy S10 or something. If you want to get any cheap phones, use the first link down in the description. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the front of the Note 2, we had a 5.5-inch Super AMOLED display, and it was a 720p panel. Now, let me break all three of those things down. First of all, Super AMOLED display, that is super good. I love seeing AMOLED displays, and even back in 2012, they were few and far between, and even like then how it is now, it was kind of a more premium feature, and that's something I really did love about this phone. Now, 5.5 inches, that is still like a pretty big size display. Now, at that time, because these phones had so much bezel around them, they were kind of measured a little bit different. Like this does not feel, smaller than a 5.8-inch iPhone 10. An iPhone 10 feels smaller than this thing. And that's mostly because how the screen kind of is set. And also there was way more bezel around this thing. In a 720p panel, you can definitely see like the pixels on this thing. It was a fairly small PPI compared to a lot of phones that we have nowadays. But again, totally okay. And I see at that time, that's what they had. And that's what pretty much most manufacturers were using at that time. So definitely not a dig on the Galaxy Note 2. You had a home button on the front-facing camera. And pretty much that covered it up for the most part on the front. That was pretty minimalistic for that day and age. Now you did have on the bottom the micro USB port, headphone jack, a micro SD card slot, which we'll get into in a second, but also the S Pen, which was pretty much like a stylus at that time. Now compared to the S Pen that we have nowadays, obviously it wasn't as functional, but still having that cool little S Pen thing that we can go ahead and take out and use if we wanted to was another really awesome thing about this device. So I think in terms of the functionality standpoint there, another big thumbs up. But now flipping it on the back, we had that plastic back that we could go ahead and take off, which revealed not only the removable battery, which was amazing, but also the micro SD card slot. Dude, those two things, if we could just get them back, we'll probably have such a corrupt phone market because nobody would go ahead and be updating their phones. There's a huge reason why these manufacturers enclose their batteries and are removing these micro SD card slots, because nobody's going to want to upgrade their phone. Their phones are going to be perfect. So at this time, the Samsung Galaxy Note 2 is, in my ways, a perfect phone. If all phones nowadays were like this, but obviously if they had newer internals, better cameras, it would be the perfect phone. We're never going to get it anymore, but it's still one of those things that when I look at this phone, I just tear up because it's just so amazing. It's literally so corny whenever I say things like that. But this thing did have a pretty solid camera setup for sure at that time. Obviously for now, it's not that great, but it had that single 8 megapixel sensor on the back and another single 1.9 megapixel front-facing camera. Now, I'm not too sure what video resolutions the front-facing camera shot in, but the back camera could do 1080p videos, which at that time, I'm sure is actually pretty decent. Now, this was, I think, the same year that the iPhone 5 came out, so keep that in mind. It definitely wasn't supposed to be like 4K beast that we have nowadays, but 1080p I think is still extremely good for a lot of things you're going to do with it, and I'm definitely not going to hit on the cameras for too long, but I saw this with my Galaxy S4, even with my Galaxy S3s. You would be surprised how many features are built in to not only this whole entire phone software, but the camera software as well. There are still some features within this specific Note 2 that you'll look at and you'll be like, wow, I cannot believe this phone had those features from back in the day. I'm talking like different filters you can add and all that kind of stuff. And obviously it's just like basic stuff we have nowadays, but that's still really cool that this one had that capability. Now the 1.9 megapixel front facing camera isn't that great, but again, it got the job done, and I'm sure for a lot of people out there is probably okay for the most part. So in terms of that pretty much covers up the camera. Now I was going to hit on the software for a minute, but there's no point really because, it's outdated. But this thing did start off with Android 4.1.1. You are upgradable to Android 4.4.2, but as I come to think about it, there is a humongous asset for the Samsung Galaxy Note 2, and to be honest, it is really the only reason why I would even kind of recommend buying this thing, but I wouldn't even recommend it then. It's pretty much the custom ROMs for this thing. Now, I think that's great. This phone has that type of capability, but again, as much as I love custom ROMs, I only love custom ROMing phones that still have quite a bit of power and still quite a bit of functionality. This phone has so much functionality, the S Pen, removable battery, micro SD card slot, but it's just not that fast of a phone that it really doesn't make that much sense to actually use it as an everyday phone, even if the software was even if it got Oxygen OS, I still probably want to recommend using this thing because of the sheer power inside of it. But this is probably the main reason why this phone is still kind of even somewhat relevant. The software on this thing, just the fact that you can go ahead and custom ROM this thing, and the fact that there's still a little bit of a development community behind it for some variants of this phone is extremely cool to me. And as I mentioned before, it is one of those things that I love seeing. I think having the removable battery is another huge asset of this thing because you can go and just expand the battery. You can go and expand the storage on this thing too. But that software is the make it or break it. If you keep it stock, completely not worth it at all. Even if you custom ROM it, it's really not worth it either. But it's still a really awesome thing that there's people still interested on a device like this for sure. So in terms of that, thumbs up for me there, and it's really the only reason I would recommend buying a Galaxy Note 2 if I'm being completely honest. Now ending it off with the performance, this device has that Exynos 4412 quad chipset, a quad-core CPU, and some type of GPU, and 2 gigabytes of RAM on 3 different models of this phone. Now, as I mentioned before, the performance of this phone isn't good anymore. I'll just get that out of the way. It is not a great performing phone. It's very, very okay for the most part. But here's the thing. Back in 2012, when this first came out, this was probably the best performing phone of that year. What other phones came out in 2012? It was the iPhone 5, I think maybe the Nexus 4, and to be honest, I think the Nexus 4 may have been the best performing phone of that year, but the Samsung Galaxy Note 2 is still probably not only one of the most powerful phones of that year, but also the most functional when you consider all things considered. So in this day and age, when you use a phone like this, obviously it's not a good phone. I'm not really expecting anybody to continue to use this phone in this day and age, but the fact that it had that type of capability and that type of performance, bro, I'll be honest, I think it's a very cool thing that this phone even still turns on nowadays, to be honest. So in terms of that and the performance standpoint, it's definitely not good anymore. It's very slow, and this was peak TouchWiz. This was when TouchWiz was throwing up all these random, when you hear that meme of that Samsung notification sound, this is that version of software. It was TouchWiz. It's crazy, bubbles everywhere. It was very weird, but to be honest, it's a stepping stone to where One UI is nowadays and just part of their history. So performance-wise, I guess it was great that year. Nowadays, it's not that good anymore. So to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and buy a Samsung Galaxy Note 2 in 2021? Well, the obvious answer here is absolutely not. I don't think this phone is even kind of worth it in this. It's not even worth it at all. But just because it's not worth it doesn't mean it wasn't worth it at one time, and more importantly, that it didn't impact the whole entire culture of phones in general. I think one of the most important things that this phone had at the time was pretty much just the performance of it at that time and also the features. Samsung just threw everything they had at that phone of that year and just threw it in a phone. Obviously, it was pretty expensive at that time, but they just gave it to us. And I think that is a humongous thing that Samsung did at that time that they're kind of lacking nowadays. And when you look at this device and you look at, the newer Samsung Galaxies and stuff, you see a change within Samsung. You see them kind of, lighting down or just kind of sampling a few features here and there and not giving us features one year and then doing something else the next year. It's just kind of one of those things that you're not really super happy with the phone that you get. But back in 2012, this was the best phone. This is almost like the Samsung Galaxy Note 9. This was the phone of that year. This was the phone for many years after, and probably up until the Samsung Galaxy Note 5, this was the phone that really, when you compared it to the next generation, it was perfect. I think the Note 5 really changed Samsung, that iteration with the Samsung Galaxy S6. That era really changed Samsung, where they kind of switched away from their throwing everything in a phone to kind of giving us, a little different, like enclosing the battery and stuff. I think that really changed up Samsung. But other than that, I think the Note 2, what it brought on the table is amazing. It still has custom ROM support kind of for like Android 9 or 10, I think maybe. You have a beautiful screen. You have, a lot of features that in 2012 were top tier. It's just obviously nowadays, it's really not that good of a look. And that's really it. I think other than that, it's a beautiful phone. And for the history and the impact that it had on the culture, I think it's still worth it in some ways. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend anyone using it, but take it as you will. But that's kind of how I think about the Samsung Galaxy Note 2 in 2021. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, or if you want to help support the channel, use the links in the description. That'll really help me out. Hit the like button, but definitely hit that subscribe button. That will mean so much. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys, and hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.